In the world of haute couture, they say the soul of a garment is in the drape. If that were true, then my wife, Julianna, was the most soulful woman on the planet. To the fashion world, she was the architect of elegance. She was the face on the cover of Vogue, the woman who walked the runway at the end of every Paris show to thunderous applause, her hands raised as if she had personally woven the sunlight into the silk. I am Elias. To the cameras, I was the supportive husband who stood 3 feet behind her, holding her coat. To the industry, I was the logistics manager. But in the quiet, dust-filled air of our private atelier at 3 a.m., I was the only person who actually knew how to sew. Julianna could sketch a beautiful silhouette. She had vision, but she didn't know the difference between a bias cut and a French seam. She couldn't tell you how to reinforce a bodice so it defied gravity, or how to treat hand-dyed Italian velvet so it didn't crush under the weight of its own beauty. I was the one who spent 18 hours a day with a needle in my hand, my fingers calloused and scarred, translating her vibes into the physical masterpieces that made her a billionaire. I didn't mind the shadow. I loved the way the fabric felt under my hands. I loved her. I thought we were a single organism. She was the eyes and I was the hands. The change began when Julianna met Dominic. Dominic was 24, a male model with bone structure that looked like it was carved from marble and a social media following that rivaled small nations. He was modernity. He was the new energy. Dominic didn't just walk for our brand, he whispered in Julianna's ear. "You're a goddess, Julianna," he would say in the VIP lounge, loud enough for me to hear while I was pinning a hem at her feet. "But this brand, it feels old, it feels heavy, it's held back by traditional methods. You're a star, but your husband treats this like a tailor shop in the 1950s. You need a partner who matches your light, not someone who smells like steam and thread." I saw the way Julianna looked at me then. It wasn't the look of a partner. It was the look of a woman who had found a stain on her favorite dress. She didn't see the man who had stayed up for 3 nights straight to finish the red petal dress that won her Designer of the Year. She saw a glorified dressmaker who was cluttering up her aesthetic. The night of our 10th anniversary coincided with the launch of the winter collection. It was her most successful show yet. Afterward, in the penthouse of the Ritz, I had a vintage bottle of wine waiting. I wanted to celebrate us. Julianna didn't sit down. She didn't even take off her heels. She just handed me a folder. "It's time to modernize, Elias," she said, her voice as cold as the champagne. "The board and I have discussed it. The brand is moving in a high street direction. We're partnering with a mass market distributor. Your meticulous hand stitching, it's too slow, it's too expensive, it's dragging down our margins." "Julianna, the hand stitching is why people pay $10,000 for a suit. It's the quality, it's the soul," I said quietly. "The soul doesn't scale, Elias," she snapped. "I'm divorcing you. Dominic is going to be the new creative consultant. He understands the vibe of the youth market. You're just a technician, a relic. I'm keeping the atelier, the name, and the flagship store. You can have the old warehouse in the garment district and the patents for the Elias stitch. Consider it a parting gift for your technical service over the years." I looked at the woman I had spent a decade protecting. She truly believed the magic was in her name and not in the thread. "The Elias stitch is what keeps your gowns from falling apart at the seams, Julianna," I said, putting my wedding ring on the marble table. "I hope Dominic knows how to use a needle, because when the thread breaks, the vibe won't hold the fabric together." She just laughed. It was a sharp, arrogant sound. "Don't be dramatic, Elias. You're replaceable. Any factory in Vietnam can do what you do." I walked out with nothing but my personal toolkit. I didn't go to a hotel. I went to that useless warehouse in the garment district. I sat on a wooden stool in the dark, my hands shaking. The silent pain wasn't from the divorce. It was from the realization that I had spent 10 years building a palace for a woman who thought I was just the janitor. For the next year, the world watched Julianna flourish. With Dominic on her arm and a massive corporate merger behind her, the Julianna Rossi brand went global. Her face was on every billboard from Times Square to Tokyo. She launched a fast fashion line that sold out in minutes. To the outside world, she was the queen of the industry, finally liberated from her boring traditional husband. But inside the atelier, things were different. Julianna had replaced my master tailors with efficiency experts. They used machines to mimic my hand stitching. They used cheaper silk blends to increase the flow. For the first 6 months, it worked. They were selling the idea of Julianna Rossi. Meanwhile, in the garment district, I was living a different life. I didn't launch a brand. I didn't hire a PR firm. I just opened the doors to the warehouse and called it the Anchor. I went back to the old ways. I found the retired seamstresses who had been fired by the big brands. I found the master weavers in Lyon who were being pushed out by synthetic factories. We didn't make collections. We made one garment at a time. Word of mouth in the high society world is like a whisper in a cathedral. It carries. A duchess who was tired of her Julianna Rossi zippers breaking came to me. A Hollywood actress who found the new Rossi fabrics itchy and cheap sought me out. I didn't put my name on the labels. I just put a single invisible silver thread in the hem, the Elias stitch. I wasn't a celebrity. I was the hidden master. Under a parent company I named Artisans Textiles, I began low-key acquiring the leases of the high-end fabric mills Julianna had abandoned. I bought the rights to the specific silkworm farms in Como that provided the only silk in the world that didn't wrinkle. While Julianna was busy being a visionary on Instagram, I was quietly becoming the man who owned the very thread she needed to survive. The turning point came at the Met Gala. Julianna had designed a masterpiece for the world's biggest pop star. It was a gravity-defying gown made of architectural silk. She had spent a month bragging about it on social media. Dominic had called it the death of traditional tailoring. But on the red carpet, under the heat of the flashbulbs and the movement of the star, the vibe failed. Because Julianna had used mass-market adhesives instead of my structural hand boning, the bodice began to sag. Because the silk was a cheap blend, it began to sweat and darken under the armpits. By the time the star reached the top of the stairs, a seam had popped. The Julianna Rossi brand was humiliated on a global stage. The next morning, the stock price of Julianna's company plummeted. The high street partners began to panic. The critics, who had been silenced by her fame, finally found their voices. "The emperor has no clothes," one critic wrote, "and Julianna Rossi has no quality." The downfall of a titan isn't a sudden crash, it's a slow, agonizing unraveling. Following the Met Gala disaster, Julianna's brand didn't just lose prestige, it lost its credit. The fast fashion conglomerate she had partnered with realized that without the structural integrity Elias provided, their returns were higher than their sales. Dresses were falling apart in the wash, zippers were snagging on the first wear. The Rossi name, once synonymous with timeless elegance, was becoming a joke on social media. While Julianna was frantically firing her PR team and blaming her seamstresses, I was sitting in the quiet of my warehouse, surrounded by the smell of cedar and raw wool. I hadn't just been sewing, I had been harvesting. During our decade of marriage, I was the one who signed the contracts with the textile mills in Italy and the lace makers in France. I knew their families. I knew their debts. While Julianna was dumping them for cheaper labor in the East, I used the Artisans Textile Holding Company to buy those mills. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it to save the craft. But the side effect was total control. By the time Julianna realized she needed to return to quality to save her brand, she found that every high-end supplier in Europe had a new exclusive contract. They weren't allowed to sell a single yard of fabric to anyone who didn't carry the Artisans Textile certification. One rainy Tuesday, a black limousine pulled up to the rusted gates of my warehouse. It looked like a shark in a bathtub. Julianna stepped out. She wasn't wearing her usual modern, Dominic-designed streetwear. She was wearing a vintage coat I had made for her 7 years ago. She was trying to evoke a memory. She was trying to play me before she even spoke. She walked into the warehouse, her heels clicking on the concrete. She looked at the master tailors working in silence, the rolls of priceless silk, and the calm, humming efficiency of the space. "Elias," she said, her voice soft, practiced, "you've done well for yourself. I always knew you had a knack for the technical side of things." I didn't stand up. I continued hand-rolling the edge of a silk scarf. "What do you want, Julianna?" "The industry is in a state of chaos, Elias," she said, walking closer, her perfume, the one I had bought for her, filling the air. "Dominic was a mistake. He didn't understand the foundation like you do. My brand is suffering because I don't have my anchor anymore. I'm here to offer you a partnership, a real one this time." She leaned over my table, a look of faux sincerity in her eyes. "We can merge Rossi and the anchor. I'll give you 40% of the company. We can be the power couple again. I've missed our late nights in the atelier, Elias, haven't you?" I finally looked up. I didn't see the woman I loved. I saw a predatory brand looking for a host to feed on. "You've missed the labor, Julianna," I said. "You haven't missed me. You missed the fact that I was the one who made your sketches physically possible. You missed the fact that I was the one who negotiated the deals you've since burned." "I'm offering you a seat at the top, Elias," she snapped, her patience thinning. "Don't be petty. Without my name, you're just a boutique tailor in a dusty warehouse. Nobody knows who Elias is." "That's where you're wrong," I said. I pulled a document from my desk, a foreclosure notice. "You didn't check who bought the Rossi flagship store's mortgage when your stock tanked last month. You didn't check who owns the Rossi trademark that you put up for collateral for that mass market merger." Julianna's face went from pale to ghostly. "What?" "I don't need your name, Elias, because I own your name." I stood up, and for the first time, she saw the silent technician as the giant he had become. "The merger you signed had a quality control clause. Since your quality return rate exceeded 30%, the conglomerate had the right to sell the trademark to the highest bidder to recoup their losses. I was the only bidder. You aren't Julianna Rossi anymore. You're just a woman with a sketch pad and no thread." She tried to grab my arm, her eyes filling with desperate tears. "Elias, please, we can fix this. I'll do anything. I'll fire Dominic. I'll go back to the sewing machine myself." "You can't go back to a machine you never knew how to use," I said, gently removing her hand. "You told me the soul doesn't scale. You were right. My soul doesn't scale to fit your ego." I signaled to my floor manager. "Julianna is leaving. She's no longer authorized to be in an artisan's facility." As she was led out, screaming about how she made me, I turned back to my scarf. The thread didn't break, the seam didn't pucker, because for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't sewing a legacy for a ghost. I was sewing a future for myself. The legal war room of Rossi and Associates smelled of expensive mahogany and the desperate sweat of lawyers who knew they were on the losing side. Across the table sat Julianna, flanked by 3 high-priced attorneys in charcoal suits. She was trying to project the image of the victimized visionary, her eyes shielded by dark glasses, her chin tilted at an angle that screamed defiance. I sat opposite her, alone. I didn't need a legal team to tell my story. I had the ledgers. "Mr. Elias," the lead attorney began, his voice dripping with condescension, "my client is suing for the return of the Rossi trademark and triple damages for what we are calling calculated intellectual theft. You used your position as a technician to surreptitiously acquire fabric mills and supply lines with the intent to choke the life out of a global brand. This is a clear breach of fiduciary duty." I didn't blink. I pulled the stack of black and white photos from my briefcase and spread them on the table. They weren't photos of us. They were macro photographs of the seams of her latest collection. "This," I said, pointing to a frayed shoulder strap on a $5,000 gown, "is why your brand died, not because of sabotage, but because of gravity and a lack of respect for the material. You're suing for intellectual theft, but there was no intellect involved in this collection, only greed." Julianna swammed her hand on the table. "I am the designer, Elias. I am the one the world loves. You were just the man in the basement. You stole the mills because you knew I couldn't produce without them." "I bought the mills, Julianna, because you stopped paying them. I have the receipts. You moved your production to the East District of a foreign province to save $8 per garment. You left the Italian weavers with $3 million in unpaid invoices. I didn't choke your supply. I saved the families you abandoned. The fact that they refuse to work with you now isn't sabotage, it's a memory." The lead attorney tried to pivot. "Be that as it may, the Elias stitch and the structural patents were developed during the marriage. They are marital property. We are demanding the immediate transfer of those patents back to the Rossi Group." I smiled then. It was a small, sad smile. That's where the silent technician has one more lesson for you. The patents were never filed under the Rossi name. They were filed under my name 4 years before we were married. I brought them into the relationship as a gift. And when you signed the severance agreement at the Ritz, you signed a clause that stated you had no further claim to any premarital technical assets. Julianna's lawyer looked at her. Her face went from pale to a mottled, angry red. She hadn't read the papers. She had been too busy looking at Dominic's social media feed to read the fine print of her own divorce. "You think you're so smart," Julianna hissed, leaning over the table, "but you're nothing without me. The world doesn't want Elias. They want the fantasy. They want the glamour. You can own the thread, you can own the mills, but you will never be the star." "I don't want to be a star, Elias," I said, standing up. "I want to be a craftsman. And as for your fantasy, it's currently being liquidated. The board of directors has just voted to remove you as creative director. Since I own the trademark for Julianna Rossi, I've decided to retire the name. There will be no more Rossi collections. The fantasy is closed." The room went deathly silent. The lawyers looked down at their tablets. The news was already hitting the wires. The Queen of Elegance was officially nameless. 6 months later, the Garment District warehouse was no longer a secret. It was the most exclusive destination in the world. I launched the Elias atelier. There were no billboards, no influencers, no Dominic. If you wanted an Elias gown, you had to fly to the district, walk past the industrial scrapyards, and ring a doorbell on a rusted steel door.
I didn't make 10,000 dresses, I made 10. Each one took 4 months. Each one was a testament to the silent pain I had endured, the patience, the precision, the refusal to cut corners. The success was overwhelming. The very celebrities who had been embarrassed by Julianna's failing gowns were now begging for an appointment. They didn't want the vide. They wanted the certainty that the dress wouldn't break.
One evening, as I was closing up the atelier, I found a woman standing by the steel door. She looked haggard. Her expensive coat was stained, and her hair, once perfectly coiffed for the cameras, was pulled back in a messy knot. It was Julianna. She had lost everything. The penthouse was gone. The power couple with Dominic had ended the moment the money ran out. He had moved on to a younger, richer influencer within weeks. She was now working as a floor manager for a mid-level department store, selling the very mass-market clothes she used to mock. "Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I saw the feature in the Times. They're calling you the new king of craft. I was wrong. I see it now. The soul really is in the work." I didn't answer. I just leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "I've been practicing," she said, her voice filled with a desperate, pathetic hope. "I've been learning to sew. I'm not great yet, but I have the eye. We can start over, Elias, not as Rossi, but as Elias and Julianna. I can handle the clients. I can be the face again. You won't have to worry about the business side of things. We can be what we were meant to be." She reached out to touch my hand, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I still love you, Elias. I just got lost in the lights. Take me back. I'll be your apprentice, anything." I looked at her hand, the soft, uncalloused hand of a woman who had never truly worked. Then I looked at my own, scarred by decades of needles and shears. "You aren't lost, Julianna," I said, my voice devoid of anger, which was the cruelest part of all. "You're just out of options. You don't love me. You love the fact that I'm the only one left who can save your reputation." "That's not true," she sobbed. "It is true," I said. "You said I was a relic. You said I was replaceable. Well, I've found a replacement for you, too. Her name is Clara. She was one of the seamstresses you fired. She's my head of design now. She doesn't have a vibe, but she knows how to build a shoulder that stays up. She's the face of the new company." I stepped back and began to close the heavy steel door. "You wanted to be free of the technician, Julianna. You got your wish. Now you have to learn to live with the clothes you made for yourself." As the door clicked shut, the last thing I saw was Julianna standing in the rain, clutching a sketch pad full of designs that no one would ever see, finally realizing that a name without a craft is just an empty thread. I walked back into the warmth of my warehouse, the silent hum of the machines the only music I needed. The ledger was closed. The stitch was perfect.
Thank you for sharing this chapter with us at Velvet Chapters Brew. Comment, like, and subscribe to see where the next page takes us.